water management, regional water plans.
Yeah.
Because that was before the Edwards regulation was really in effect, I think back 1997.
One through four were pumped from the Edwards.
And so there was still a great debate as to, you know, whether we even needed water, you know, all this kind of stuff. So we had 5 different plans. One was the reservoir plan, one was the environmental friendly plan, one was the local water plan, and the other one was
There was the least cost effective
plan.
one. Yeah.
I forget what the 5th one was.
Least cost
And
effective.
ultimately, those 5 plans got
Well, you know, we
parts
had
of it just
another
got
step where we were
merged.
gonna
Yeah.
develop 3 and then 1, and we just went to the 1. But the point here is during that debate, amongst all the other things that was being debated, there was significant emphasis placed on deference to local water plans. And that kept getting reinforced in successive planning cycles, to where that's kind of the mindset of particularly the planning group members that have been on the group for a while. So I kind of wanted to give you that context.
And well, and we asked, when we asked about a specific item about who actually gets to choose what plan, we got guidance in the form of those letters from Water Development Board saying basically it's the WUGs that really get
Yeah,
involved.
and I think the board's rules have,
Right.
you know, evolved too, based on how those first rounds of planning went. So that's kind of the context, you know, where Region L kind of arrived at that deference to local water plans.
So it went from regional planning to my planning.
Well, I mean,
That's what it went to basically. Started out as a regional plan, how can we move water from these areas to these areas to, this is my plan, I want my plan. And that's why we're having.
Well, I mean,
this
that's
fight,
certainly
because my plan is better
perspective.
than their plan, and my plan should be rated A1, and so give me the funding and let him worry about his plan. That's sort of where we are right now.
Well, I think it went to a culmination of local plans, and not a straightforward, this is mine, that it has the preference. It's more of my local plan that can coexist with your local plan that can coexist with your.
That's part of the process. to
Exactly,
make
the
sure
sum
that
of all local plans is the regional plan.
Right, and also to, you know, regionalization or cooperative work between water user groups is encouraged here. You know,
Right, and-
every
and-
water user group in their own silo is not.
and the way that's kind of evolved here in Region L is, I'll take the Schertz-Seguin Saws example. I don't know how many meetings we had where we had those 2 competing projects in the plan, and it got in the plan. Well, at some point, it became economically, politically feasible to combine those projects, and that was done. Now, the planning group.
But that was WUG driven.
Yes, it was
Right.
WUG driven. If the planning group had, you know, stepped out and say, y'all need to do this, y'all need to do that, like, you know what good Texans do, we bow our necks and say, you say what? And so there's a little of that, you know, sociology embedded in all of this.
There's a lot of combined efforts in the plan as it sits. I mean, GVRAs by definition for the most part are combined. There's not single users, you know, on the other end of that. The Canyon Regional projects, the HCQA projects, I mean, all of those are multi-entity based, you know, so I mean, it has a lot of, you know, components where there's, you know, groups that are banded together to you know, have supplies.
Yeah, well, my deal is I see some benefits to that dropping 50,000 acre feet off in Gonzales County. Because
Well, I'm
right
not
now, all I
saying
got is
for
people sucking water out, but if I can drop 50,000 acre feet in there, it would be a benefit for those 5 entities with the straws already there also. So what I'm saying is, we can't forget about regional planning. We've got to have those plans in there. We can't just say, I don't like that one, don't want to do it. It may be a big benefit to my district to do something like that, or have that plan move forward, at least get it in the plan so people start thinking about it and looking at it.
Well, my point was simply that it wasn't complete according to the definitions they provided us on the basis that we're supposed to identify all the things that are associated with the plan
And do
and
cost comparison.
equitably compare is all.
Right, so they could have just then put in, if there's needs up there, they could have put those needs into the deal and that would have been okay, right?
Well, again, this goes back to what the Water Development Board's guidance is about who makes a determination as to who's gonna serve them. And I mean, that, at least in terms of what we got in that letter guidance, was the WUG has a role in making a determination like that.
So in this example, maybe let me paint a scenario here and ask, I guess, what latitude we have, you know, with the board rules and requirements. So, your specific example of, from your perspective, it would sure be nice to have that volume of water come to that area to maybe be alternate supplies for some existing uses of a resource.
Exactly.
So if all the WUGs say, no, my number one recommendation is the groundwater project, so let's just, you know, get to that specific. And that gets in that's the recommended water management strategy for that WUG, if you will. I guess, how does the planning group, taking that more regional perspective, say,
Put it as an alternative.
Yeah.
is it
That's-
the
yeah.
alternative route the way to go?
Cost
Well,
it out, put it in there. If they don't want it, they don't have to take it.
Just has to
But
be
it's-
costed out on the same
it's-
basis.
that's right, it has to be
It's out
evaluated,
in
just
public.
like, it has to be evaluated just like any other, any recommended strategy. But, so, the alternative water management strategy concept is a substitution concept. This is a project, or these are projects that would replace these other projects if, for some reason, they become not unfeasible, not practical.
Right.
So, in this example, to continue this example, if the planning group were to put the GBRA project in as an alternative water management strategy, and if at some point in the future, you know, it could be due to MAG limitations, it could be due to permitting issues, it could be due to the WUGs in that area may decide, they may realize some impact that strategy is having that they don't want to continue, and that is the time that the alternative would be substituted into the
And
plan.
remember, it's tied to the MAG DFC process also, so
Mhm.
if all of a sudden we have 50,000 more acre feet in there for the MAG, unless that project goes, that 50,000 acre feet doesn't get in there for people just to grab for their own project. It would get in there if that water went into the district, right? So there could be a MAG and there could be an alternative MAG based on this scenario, okay? So we can say in this plan, these people have decided they want to do this, but there would be 50,000 acre feet more if we did this plan, and they decided, no, they didn't want to do that.
Yeah, I guess if you could show that pumping was going to decrease due to implementation of a surface water strategy, or,
You would say pumping would increase because you have 50,000 acre feet.
well,
Or
or the
down to the
planned use of groundwater would decrease, therefore making that water available for other planned uses, because you're bringing in the water from the other
Bringing
strategy.
in a new
Right,
source
a new
that
source.
could be
Well,
permitted out.
I think you've set the stage here
Yeah.
that even though deference is paid to the individual water user groups to say what their recommended strategies are, the planning group can put other things in the plan in the alternative category that then become available
Through the amendment process.
through the amendment process if, you know, working relationships progress to a point to where you want to do something different, or if there's a permitting or some other, you know, impediment that comes up.
I guess the only thing that I point out is, and I agree with that, I don't see a problem with that as stated. I think the one exception though is in relation to, and this goes back to the other problem we had in the last cycle where, you know, GBRA submitted a plan that, you know, used at the time TWA's supply and the ACPUA supply, you know, without asking those entities whether they could even, you know, if they would be interested in partnering on that, and submitted the plan, you know, without even divulging that prior to putting it into the process. I mean, I raised an issue then, and, you know, I mean, I think that, you know, and eventually that was solved after we talked, and we made it an alternate, and we agreed to have it in as an alternate. I think though, as a minimum, in submitting something, if it's gonna rely on other, you know, entities, supplies, or projects, that those things should be at least you know, sponsored, or, you know, the discussion be had in advance and their agreement to those submittals before something's in the plan.
Is that where the board kind of acknowledged this was an intra-regional conflict because it would be an over-allocation of that resource? Or
I'm not really familiar with that specific scenario, but.
Well, did it bust the mag, or what did?
No, it was just,
No,
it was looking at
just-
combining.
It was combining
Two or
three
three
separate
projects.
water supply projects that were all individually in the regional plan, and putting together basically another project saying it's gonna be the combination of all these. We're gonna use this supply, and this supply, and this supply, and do this with it, and deliver it, you know. to
Without
all those,
consulting.
yeah, all those users. And I mean.
Without
obviously,
agreement.
Yeah,
we
without
obviously,
agreement.
well, not even, I mean, it wasn't even with our knowledge. So, you know, I mean, until we saw it on the board, it's like, whoa.
Yeah.
GBR's a gift.
Well, I'm just saying, I'm not being GBRA, I'm just saying, I mean,
It
you
could have
know,
been any group.
we worked that out at that time. It's just, I would think, given the fact that we kind of, you know, worked that out once before, it'd be good to understand up front if someone's gonna combine projects, you know, to have a, you know, large project, simply that they, you know, get the agreement of those other parties that they're gonna submit it in the plan. I think that's consistent with what we hear about the water user group, you know, being, you know, ultimately deciding who serves them. So.
And see, I guess what a sense I'm wanting to get from the group is what is the point of this plan? Is it to access? Is it to be eligible for state dollars in permitting, or because really until the customers are online or available for contract revenue pledges, it really is a wish list, right?
Well, we recognize that as far as getting financing, you're gonna have to have something firm, whether it's, you know, regular bond financing, or whether it's water development board or whatever, you're gonna have some financial surety. The market's not gonna give you, you know, tens or hundreds of millions of dollars on, well, we're hoping to sell this later, you know.
But I mean, is there some way to do the recommended list and alternative list based on the kind of?
I think that ultimately is what this comes down to, is our better management of what becomes recommended versus just, you know, well, just ask each individual user from what they submitted, and everything becomes whatever they say. I mean, I think ultimately our management of that, or dealing with that more expertly, I think might solve a lot of this. Just like it solved that particular conflict. Once we talked, it was like, well, sure, put it in as an alternate. Just don't show it as a recommended. I mean, it's kind of like the other issue where the water in Gonzales County at $900 an acre foot, that might be a great supply for us in the future, but the problem is that's not delivered to where we might be using it. It might be, you know, 3 times that in terms of the actual delivered cost. The water user groups just need to be able to compare apples to apples on that sort of thing.
And not to be Debbie Downer, but as well to your question about the 16 plan, the challenge always is when someone doesn't like project X, Y, Z, and so they want to set a very low threshold, whether it's Cibolo Valley or Vista Ridge. I don't like that. I don't want it going in for my own political reasons as recommended, and I think it needs further study. You know, what's the challenge there? Other than the WUG saying, well, we're doing this project, and you don't want to go back as the sponsoring entity with an amendment process and bring it all back up. So it meets the threshold, and the WUG's putting it in as a sponsor, but then other people are trying to knock it down.
When we had projects in there that didn't even have all the data in terms of where it would even go.
Exactly.
Make the threshold, so.
Well, it's hard to have accurate cost comparisons if you don't include all the data, and it may be that we need to be more organized about what we consider adequate data.
Well, Tim, if I may make just a suggestion, kind of to Tom's example of, you know, the project where that got thrown on the table without, you know, the other potential participants being aware of it. You know, I think the planning group can rigid and we can write a kind of a recommendation, you know, that we're not gonna do this unless this, this, and this. Or we can just have kind of a philosophy that says, you know, if there is a multiple project proposed, you know, the planning group would expect that it has been discussed amongst all of those particular entities before it gets full consideration. And that way it's not a real hard and fast edict, if you will, but it is a philosophy that the planning group would expect that multiple entity projects would have been discussed amongst those entities. And if not, then the planning group would kind of remand it back to them to have those discussions and then bring it back. So is that
That's how we
something
handle
that
it.
the group might want to put in their document?
I think by you articulating it, I think so, the concept. I guess what I'm having difficulty with, and you know, for the record, everyone knows, we don't sponsor water management strategy, so I really don't have a dog in this fight, whichever we're gonna do. It seems to me we're struggling with, well, how do we remain flexible and accommodating? And others might look at that flexibility and accommodation as being sort of arbitrary and not specific in what's required. We hear on one hand, at least what I've heard, in order to evaluate and abide by what's been required, what we're required to do by code is to equally and fairly evaluate potential strategies. And, but, you know, as a matter of practice, we've had some strategies that didn't have sufficient information or detail to allow for that evaluation. So as I listen to the discussion, you know, we generally have had a philosophy, as I've understood it and experienced it, is there's a strategy a user group wants to have in the plan, it's in the plan. And then at some point down the road, we have a discussion about recommending an alternate, and we hash that out as a group. But there's, the general philosophy is we create a, we'll use the term wish list or menu of potential projects. We create that and try not to use it as use our mechanism as a tool to say, well, we have preference for so-and-so's project over so-and-so's project and so on. But I don't know how, I think where I have a lot of difficulties, if we're going to go back to the group and recommend, well, these are the standards. To me, we're specifying criteria, not loose. I think we may need to try to do both and craft a set of standards if we think we can do that. That here's the minimum, all projects, in order to, and this is just a suggestion, but perhaps we ultimately end up defining these are the standards for consideration to be recommended. And for even consideration, that doesn't mean you necessarily are. We can talk about whether or not that gets, whether we want to recommend that get some other consideration. But, and then those that don't meet that standard, no matter how much one entity or another might want it or not want it, it has no opportunity for consideration as recommended. I mean, I think we could address the philosophy side of it, but if we're going to suggest a standard, I think we have to define what those criteria are. Which brings me to a question from Brian. When you, I'm sure it's not very formal with applications and so on, but when strategies are proposed to you, I assume you have certain elements of that strategy that you must have in order to do these evaluations as described.
So, I mean, before we ever evaluate a strategy, it has to, the planning group has to approve it. And so in general, when that happens, we at least get enough background information. Either I get it either directly from the water user group, or the water user group tells the planning group directly what the general concept is. Once, you know, because we have to write a scope and put a fee to it that y'all approve, the board has to approve before we can start doing that. You know, once that is done, I will typically reach out to the water user group and get as much specifics as they can. Sometimes it's just a conceptual idea. And it's, you know, well, we want to evaluate, you know, how much water we can pull from XYZ, what it's going to take to firm it up, and what it's going to take to treat it and deliver it to these, you know, to this customer base. Other times, and you know, Vista Ridge is a great example, there's studies already been done, and I reach out to Steven or somebody at Saul's, and it's, can you provide me with your pipeline route and your kind of cost and facilities estimate? And what we do is we take the facilities as proposed and that other engineering firm's estimate, and we run it through the cost model, and we kind of compare the cost between, here's what regional planning cost dollars are, and here's what the independent engineering ones are. If those two dollars and cents are close, we'll typically just present the regional planning ones. If it becomes a major issue or where it's two pretty competing costs and differences, we sometimes present both in the write-up, given that the regional planning ones are the ones that are going to make it into the plan, as just a comparison. And it makes it easier for the water user group to say, when they get the public saying, well, the regional planning says this project's going to cost $2,000 an acre foot, and you guys are saying it's $1,800 an acre foot. What's the, why? We can have that, that information side by side. So, but it can be anywhere in between too. It can be, a little more specific, but maybe not full engineering evaluation done, but some preliminary information's been provided. So, and we're just, I just try to work with the individual WUG and gather as much information I can so we can develop something that can be compared to other strategies and be reasonable to put into the plan as much as possible. So, does that make sense?
Well, I understand you do that, but
Yeah.
let me ask, I do like my dad ask it louder.
No.
So that's great when you have full-blown studies, and I can see where that specificity may make it easy and so on.
Yeah.
And maybe even quick and beneficial, but for those strategies that you're evaluating as part of your role at Regional,
Yeah.
to be clear, there's a minimum set of information. I'm assuming you.
Yeah, I mean, I need to know the source of supply. I need to know approximately what size that project's going to be. I need to know where the water is going to be delivered and what it's going to be used for. And and to tie along with that, I need to know like the receiving entity, do they already have peaking capacity in their system, or do we need to size the facilities for peaking capacity? And then, that may be all I get. And from that point, it's a matter of trying to find, for us to run some initial analysis to figure out what it takes to firm up as a source of supply, and drawing a preliminary pipeline route and costing it to get treated water to delivery. And then typically before I even present that to the planning group, I will send that back to the entity.
Mm-hmm.
And is this what you had in mind?
Right.
And kind of refine that if necessary, and then present it to the planning group.
Being a plan and planning for future decades, and the fact that there are some pretty small entities that we're planning for, the bar in terms of the amount of information and the amount of study and the amount, how much is already fleshed out. A small town planning
Sure.
for a 2040 need, from a planning perspective, the bar can't be too high.
Sure.
Because we need to be able to, evaluate everybody similarly, and some
Yeah.
just aren't.
But isn't, okay, I'm trying to get to where's the bar at? I understand it's real low.
Yeah.
Maybe I can clear it. But what is it? Can we articulate that in writing? Where the bar is for an entity to submit a strategy for work and evaluation?
I'd say the minimum bar is the project a firm supply through the drought of record at the quantity desired? Does it not cause an over allocation of the source water? Is it treated to drinking water standards and delivered to a point that I've been told by the entity? And from that, I think and does it comply with, if applicable, environmental flow
Right.
standards?
Okay.
And I think what you're probably trying to get at is also, did they provide us number of miles of pipe, or Or I guess you figured that out.
I have to figure that out a lot of times. Rarely is the case when I get an engineering study from an entity and say, here's our project.
Need to know where the supply's at, where
Where's it gonna go?
Right.
Typically, that's what I get.
And then you do
And I-
your costing
And
to
I
it.
need
Right.
about X number of acre feet, you know.
But
Yeah.
what is the
So-
minimum
so
amount
given
of
that
information we
information,
need for an
Brian.
apples to apples comparison?
Well, that's right. If that's what we're directed to do,
Right.
it seems to me the minimum, let's call it, I would call them the minimum technical standards you've just articulated.
I think it's those 5 things, and given that when we go through the costing exercise, we don't straight line it necessarily, like the pipeline route. We look for the rule of thumb is try to find existing right-of-ways, avoid major cities, avoid multiple stream crossings if necessary,
Well, whatever practices you put in.
Right.
That's,
I mean,
that's pretty detailed
that's
stuff.
part of the-
And every end of engineering practice.
Yeah.
is the
Yeah.
point.
And as for quantifying the availability and over allocation of supplies, you're not necessarily gonna get that from the WUD,
No.
but you have
Right.
tools that you
WHAM,
use.
GAM,
GAM, DFCs.
simple calculations in a spreadsheet, if it's like a reuse strategy. We want to reuse 50,000 acre feet. Well, you only have capacity in your wastewater treatment plant to do 10,000, so I can't do that. Or we want to use 50,000 acre feet of water. Well, let's look at your demands. Well, you're only going to use 50,000 by 2070, and you're not.
Might be that 2070 forecast though,
Yeah.
that 50,000.
Well, yeah, even by 2070, you're only going to utilize 50,000, and you're not going to get all 50,000 back to your wastewater treatment plant. So that's impossible. So there's
Standard engineering practice.
yeah,
So getting back to Tim's request though, if you could,
those 5 things.
if you could enumerate those 5 things as the start to put in whatever kind of document will.
Yeah, you want me to write it up real quick?
Or if you could send something.
But that's
Cole and I
fine.
later.
Yeah,
I
I'll
think
do
we
that.
still allow the GBRA.
Well, that's what
ASR in there. I mean, if it.
You're talking about the project
Right.
that was the source of conflict?
Right.
Well, that's the next question.
You're still gonna have to get to that point of use somewhere there. I mean, we can't, otherwise we're not gonna be compliant with
Well,
this apples to apples business.
Yeah, is that exactly. So if these are the minimum requirements in order, the pieces of information to be supplied to you so that you can go through the engineering process and to the extent necessary and you're able to develop pipeline routes and so on. Ultimately, I would think there's a set of information needed in order to comply with the evaluation requirements. Whether you derive that information based on what's been supplied to you or whether it's handed to you by an entity such as SAWS. That evaluation, that enumerated evaluation in 34E, so on, that, whether it's applied or you determine it, that information has to be presented in order to make the apples to apples comparison, correct? So if we had, if there were minimum technical requirements that this information either be supplied or you as the evaluator could develop it, then the problem strategy would have, would not have,
Well, it would have been
an
maybe
incomplete evaluation.
incomplete on the final destination, so the cost would have been incomplete. In that
Probably
example.
should have fallen, at least as I understand it, put categories instead of eventually, and it was recommended, I think, is where that wound up in the plan. By Brian.
50,000
Correct my.
You actually talking about the desal project.
Yeah, it was a decent.
Yeah.
That wound up as a recommended strategy or as an alternate strategy?
No, it was recommended.
It was recommended, and it probably should have fallen in the needs further study if you don't know where it's gonna go or what it's gonna cost.
Yeah.
Well, was it
There was-
tied in
so that
part
was
of
a-
the mid-basin though?
That strategy was 100,000 acre feet. The first 50,000 was
Right.
local and county, and was fairly defined.
Right.
The other 50 was ambiguous.
Well,
And that's
if it
where the
would've
issue.
stopped at Calhoun County, it would have made perfect sense, it would have met all the criteria, but it didn't. But it had the cost in terms of treatment,
It
right,
did- you're
because
right.
you doubled the quantity.
You're right. It didn't make sense to just end it in Gonzales County.
But was it tied to the rest of the mid-basin project where there were issues?
It was there as it was left in Gonzales County, if I remember. That could be used as a substitute for the Mid-Basin project or parts of the Mid-Basin project. Or to to enhance the
Parts of it
mid-basin
tied to
project.
the three project, the three,
No, well, no,
not really.
I don't think we ever went that far.
so it wasn't tied to anything else.
HCP, no, what ended up in the plan was 50,000 being dropped in the middle of Gonzales
Yeah, I
County.
mean, we're kind of dissecting
So-
that specific example, but I
Well, that's the
mean,
one, but we're all looking at
Well, I
that.
know.
So that one would have had to say, we're gonna dump it in here in an ASR, and it's available to these people if they want it.
Or
And their end
say,
users.
just make some assumptions on where it was gonna go.
Right.
So that you could get that end user cost, that full end user
Well,
cost.
Yeah, just choose a place, not park it in.
Well, it's to
Well,
it's
and
to
for-
address a
could-
specific need.
A somewhat similar example was the reuse that we put in at the very end. We did not have information on specific end users, but we used cost estimates that we, at lower quantities of reuse that we did have information, and we inflated those costs at the end of the timeline and the larger quantities by that ratio because we didn't know specific pipelines necessarily, but within the city of XYZ, and there was about 6 of them, reuse is going to be used. We don't know where the pipes are going to go, but based on what we do know, that cost should be similar.
But Greg, you're right, Edward, that the way that project was sold was that if mid-basin project didn't fully develop, some of that water from the desal would be utilized.
Yeah.
And so, but I'm just saying as a concept for everybody, we get beat up because our MAG is this. And everybody still wants water, so they put these alternative strategies. And then the legislature says, well, you guys, you're not giving enough water or anything. Then we have a strategy that could add water to our MAG, and we don't want it. That's all I'm saying is it makes us look bad because we got a MAG, and they make y'all use it as a cap. And then when there's a strategy that says, hey, we're gonna increase the recharge by artificially recharging 50,000 acre feet. If you don't want it, you don't want it, but it at least doesn't make us look bad. Say if somebody said, here's a strategy, the district agrees with it, it's 50,000 acre feet. If you don't want it, you don't want it, but it at least takes the pressure off of us by us saying, no, that's it, you can't have any more water, no more strategies, no more anything. Then we have a strategy that looks good, or river water for ASR, and people try to keep it out of there, and then we get hammered again in the legislature because there's
This
no
one didn't
extra
terminate in
water.
the ASR though. I mean, the problem with that one is it didn't terminate in the ASR.
Well, that's what
It
I'm
was
saying,
there
though,
as-
in the future-
It was there as delivered water,
What I'm
potable
saying-
water out there.
Okay, but in the
Yeah.
future, if they say we're dumping it in there, 50,000 acre feet right there, come get it, take it or leave it, then that's in the MAG. If you leave it in the MAG, that makes me look good,
Well, I think
and
that's,
I'm good.
I think that's extremely valuable input from.
Well, that's what I'm saying, is that's why I don't want these type of strategies to be left out, because
Groundwater
to me,
augmentation strategies could
looks good.
basically resolve that.
But they would have a cost associated with them that would be attached to that
Right.
project
Well,
that would make this whole thing
Right.
make sense.
And there could be all kinds of different
That's
groundwater
fine.
augmentation or surface water augmentation strategies.
so that's fine, as long as it can be in the plan. If somebody doesn't want it, it still should be in the plan that water could be there for this cost. That's all I'm
Well-
saying.
And in your example, in the plan would be as an alternative strategy.
For whoever wants it.
Yeah.
Well, I don't wanna get ahead of what you outlined, but,
We are.
we're way out.
Too late.
But I want to,
I like your method.
I wanna express that, part of the problem that a lot of people brought up with our laundry list of projects totaling so many times the amount of water needed is not gonna really be helped by us having total deference to anything that anybody wants to put in the plan. If you have a user group, I mean, everybody is a user group, you know, GBRA is a user group, San Antonio, all the cities, every little town is a user group.
Well,
And
actually, they're a wholesale water provider. They
yeah,
don't
you're right,
use-
you're right. But if you take everybody's plan, every plan that's listed up here, and you just include everybody's plan, and you don't try to have minimum standards that mean that you're comparing things, apples to apples, then you end up just having a laundry list that has a vast amount of water and makes a very unrealistic water plan. And so I think it's really smart to have minimum standards and try to make costs comparable so that we know that's what that water's gonna cost in Gonzales. But if we tie it to a user group as a alternative strategy, then we're gonna have to talk about the pipeline to get it there. So that's, I think, a very rational and logical thing to try to do.
I agree. I think a lot of folks here do agree. Let me ask another question, kind of set at least context that I can understand. Does Water Development Board provide any guidance on categorization of strategies? I know I've seen reference to the phrase recommended and alternate. That's all I've found.
That's all there is. And the important thing to remember when talking about recommended and alternate is something that could take the place of a recommended in the future. It's not a strategy that, just another strategy out there. It would meet a need that's already met by a recommended. It's a substitution process.
Right. So for the regional planning purposes, we're tasked with identifying water management strategies that are feasible. They have to be analyzed, or evaluated is the term, to bring them all to this apples to apples, for us to be able to make that consistent and fair comparison of strategies. And then we, as I understand it, have a responsibility to identify at least enough recommended strategies to meet all needs, unless we decide for some reason we're not going to meet someone's need, and articulate that. Right. Okay.
Like agriculture.
Like agriculture. Or yeah, whatever might be another one. And so then I know I'm going to touch it, but let me try not to touch it. Alternative water management strategies are in every way the same thing and could substitute for one or many or a different set of recommended strategies, but they have all the same technical elements provided, so they all meet the same condition. And then Region L has defined this category called needs further study. TWDB, I assume, speaks to that in no way. It could include iceberg movement.
It could, and TWDB doesn't say.
I'm sponsoring.
TWDB doesn't say you can't do that either.
Yeah. Okay.
So
Okay.
You're welcome.
So, and so we have one other catch-all sort of grouping, but we may be able, in order to provide an idea, in order to address the public's perception of the plan and the topic I don't want to touch just yet, maybe there's another category. It's not just some deficient or innovative strategy that we don't have certain costs on, but it might be, you might be able to have a project that maybe doesn't have all the technical elements, but is poised to serve in some way. Should a few more details be refined, and
Some
then
of it needs further study if we think about how that came about and was used. A lot of that was when people would present projects right at the very end of the process when there was no budget to evaluate them. They didn't bring forth the money themselves to task the consultant with evaluating them. And they got parked basically in that holding pattern for, well, in the next 5-year cycle, we'll flesh that out, but we were too late on this one. I mean, isn't that how that was used primarily?
Yeah, there is, but there's also a subset of the need further study that are projects that have been fully evaluated, and there's just no one willing to sign their name to it as we want that as a recommended alternative. And a good example is brush management.
Yeah.
We fully evaluated brush management.
Right.
That it
Technically
could be a
possible,
recommended strategy.
but there's no entity stepping up
No
saying
en-
that's
exactly.
what I want
There
to
was
do.
no entity stepping up, or maybe the institutional framework wasn't there to
Right.
really let it happen. So how was that, how was a groundwater district going to recognize that recharge and convert that to a mag.
Yeah, part of that came about because you couldn't consider brush management firm. All you gotta do is let the cedar regrow and it's not firm anymore. So, I mean, I think some of those kinds of uncertainties were around those topics. I mean, you know, nobody doubted that it could work. But, well,
I wouldn't say no one doubted it could work.
there was substantial
trying to
evidence.
quantify that.
There was substantial evidence it could work, but yeah, it's difficult to quantify and couldn't be considered firm in the conventional utility system.
Right. There's a lot of theoretical analysis there.
It's kind of like cloud seeding, you know?
Yeah, those,
Nobody doubts
all ones that
that,
have
nobody doubts it
categories.
works under certain circumstances, but, you know, you don't know if you're gonna have clouds.
It rained a lot in Oklahoma, not Wichita Falls.
Yeah, exactly,
So just for the, I'm sorry, did I cut you off?
no.
For the sake of us, so we all start from the same place, the effect of being designated, recommended, or alternative, what is the effect? At least my understanding is if a strategy is identified as recommended, it's eligible for the funding opportunities. It may be required for some permitting, I'm not certain about that. But that was the big distinction between that and alternative. Is that
That
the limit of?
No, that and the recommended is going to meet a need. Like a designated need in the plan is being met by those recommended strategies for the most part.
The recommendeds aren't, there's not some, you can have multiple recommended strategies that serve the same need.
That we could do that, yes.
Do we do that?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, this planning group has specifically told us to do that via the conservation strategy. Give conservation to every single municipal lug. And if that in some instances that conservation covers someone's projected needs, but at the same time that entity says, well, we want a new well also to meet our projected needs. So in that sense, we're double covering a need with conservation and
New
a
well,
well.
yeah.
But that's one example. There's other examples where we're double meeting that need with strategy XYZ and well XYZ and surface water ABC. So
Okay.
both those things happen.
And then procedurally, if there is a strategy that has been designated in the regional plan, and then I guess ultimately the state plan as alternative, if the group wants to redesignate that strategy as recommended, they can do so through some administrative process. I think we've done that before. It's fairly limited, some notice and so on, and then brought to the group, correct? And it can be redesignated.
Yeah, the restraint that I'll point out on that is that alternative strategy is in the plans designated for a certain need. So that simple administrative substitution means that it's going to go to that very same
Okay.
need. So if it's in the plan as an alternative strategy for San Marcos, the planning group can't use that simple administrative substitution to move that thing to New Brunswick.
Right.
That would require a more formal amendment process.
Okay.
Gotta have the water
And-
user group step up.
And in almost every case, it's a
Well,
direct,
that's
it's a
assuming
swap.
that has
You
occurred.
take one out and you put one in.
Yes.
I know that like in the valley, that was an issue with McAllen, is it needs to be a substitution. You can't just move one from alternative to recommended
Right.
without taking something out.
You should have to have the public.
You have to take
comment.
something out?
Even for minor.
Not a public hearing though,
Oh,
for substitution. You have to talk about it in a regional planning group meeting and have comment on it, but you don't have to have a full public hearing for a substitution amendment.
Maybe not on our end, on the water board end, because they're still amending the water plan.
Oh, they have to probably.
Yeah.
Who cares what they do?
Anyway, that was a subtlety, but I just.
Yeah, no, I
That's a
think,
good point, though. Well, I mean, we've got to remember, let's think about the underpinnings of this going in the real world. You know, I mean, we establish, needs that we're gonna be, experiencing in the next 50 years.
right.
You know, we plan to, and say that's 1,000 acre-foot shortage for a given entity. You make a plan, you may make multiple plans. right? Because you can't not supply that 1,000 acre feet. You may look at the most cost-effective, least environmentally impactful, you know, best choice of all those. And technically, I guess that's what we think about in terms of, that's what we want our recommended plan to be. Now, if that doesn't work out, and we recognize a lot of these things can't, right? The requirement from the Water Development Board is we have to have, you know, we've got a plan to make sure we can meet that need regardless. So, you know, we back that up, and I mean, I think that's what the alternate plans are really supposed to be, you know, are the backups.
Well,
now, you may have more than one, you know, there may be, and there's management supply issues and, you know, other uncertainties in this thing, but ultimately, I mean, that's what we're really trying to sort through, I think. It's,
Well, where you have multiple strategies, multiple ideas to meet a need, you gotta pick which one, you know, well, you should pick which one is gonna meet that need. And, you know, the criteria in the evaluation in 5734 is, you know, which one's more cost effective, which one's least impactful on the environment, which one is the criteria that the rules give you to decide which one.
How rigorous of an amendment process have y'all gone through in the past for minor and major?
Well, we did the substitution
Yeah.
one for it was one of the.
For the Loft Channel Reservoir down, GBRF channel. We've done a minor, we've not done a major.
Well, we did that big one for Canyon Regional after the second regional plan. There was one.
Yeah.
Was that, you know, that was kind of before the major minor
Yeah.
substitution
Yeah.
days. So it was an amendment to the plan, but that was after like the second regional water plan.
There was a minor amendment we just did too.
Well, we did the IWPP.
Was that a minor amendment?
Was that the time?
That was a minor. Be a big minor.
I remember I thought we had a public meeting.
We
You
did,
do, and
we
you have
did.
to for a minor and a major, I think, but
So anyway, we've done a range of them, you know,
Yeah.
and some of them it has been when we're under a different set of rules.
And you will, I mean, if I had to guess, I'd guess that going forward, you know, since House Bill 4 and SWIFT, we're gonna see more amendments to plans because.
I mean, that's where my
Yeah,
mindset
Region
is,
G's
is
got
that
us
we
beat
wanna
from
be
what I understand.
more active in the amendment process because frankly, the GBRA of the past, I mean, these were numbers from a point in time and we have better numbers and relationships now to where we would want to reevaluate that and come either major or minor, you know, if we've got to do it for any of these strategies.
Yeah, if that has to happen before the end of the next cycle or before, you know.
But just thinking about moving forward for this next one, I think there may be less sensitivity, at least from
I don't
our
think-
perspective, on
Yeah.
recommended versus alternative,
Yeah.
if there's a process to get us over the hump.
And I don't think that, and frankly, and I'll say this, I mean, I'm not concerned with some of the things that we
That
talk
goes
about here
past.
today. You know what I mean? That, you know, I'm not concerned about those things recurring in the real world at this point. On the other hand, the point is, if we did bump into those in a way that was not, you know, a good thing to happen in the process of trying to get to the regional plan, it's just having to work through those once. I just think we, you know, probably need to at least try to, you know, solidify that where we can avoid them, you know, in future, you know, rounds. Although I think it's probable that we would revisit any of that, so.
Fair.
Actually, after your last comments, Steve, I'm now wondering that description of alternative, it says, but are not, the first sentence, but are not designated to meet an identified need. Is that is that accurate?
They do have needs associated with them, but they're not recommended.
they're not recommended
To meet that
to meet
need.
that need, yeah.
Okay.
I
That's
guess
why
you
it's
could say
not
not
designated.
yet designated.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. Oh, okay.
See, I view this as like, let's think about this in terms of the dating world, okay? You propose to one lady,
What kind of dating do you do?
but just in case that one doesn't work
Single.
out, you do have an alternate that you probably propose to next.
Well, no,
Now,
I
there
don't
could
think
be,
that's how that
there could be
works.
others though that require further study.
Oh, man.
As a single guy, I can pretty much agree with that assessment.
We'll let you present that one to the next planning board.
That's a,
No, I don't think so.
I can get you pictures if you need.
No,
He's only doing that because he knows me well.
Tom, can you
That's
say that
right.
again?
I would never risk that, no.
He
Don't
would
worry, we
not
got it
risk
on.
this among other women.
Wait, so did you just write that alternative up there, or is that from something? Because that's not the way this reads.
From our last meeting, wasn't it?
I had tried to summarize the three categories we used in the past.
35710, definitions and acronyms.
357.
Alternative water management strategy is a fully evaluated water management strategy that may be substituted into a regional water plan in the event that a recommended water management strategy is no longer recommended. So there's no need. You're saying this was Region L's methodology?
Essentially, yeah.
Okay, my bad. Well, I mean, if we're gonna go into conversations about management supplies and
I think we're
alternatives.
there, right?
I mean, if that's the threshold, I mean, without an identified need, make that kind of the cutoff between them.
Well, the only, and I'll take up for you on this one. I mean, the only problem I see is, I mean, it does come down to the wholesale water providers, you know, because they're the ones impacted by, you know, not having an identified need per se, or not having a WUG speak up for them.
Right.
And that relegates you to either all alternative strategies, which isn't, you know, necessarily viable
Preferable.
in a lot of ways. You know, or if we, in terms of, management amount, and what would be allowable to cover, well, we're not too sure about, you know, how much variance we may have, growth may be different, other factors may change, weather, you know, driven commodity variations. So maybe there's a 50% or 30% or some additional increment that supply is planned for as a buffer kind of thing, you know. But the point is, other than those kinds of things, this kind of cuts wholesale water providers out entirely. And I don't think that's the intent of this.
I
You know,
mean, their wholesale water providers will be planning to provide for their customers.
Yeah.
Right.
And even other entities in their service area.
right.
You know, they need to, should coordinate with
Right.
them. You know, the whole surprise strategy, you know, really
Well,
doesn't make
we
a lot of
don't wanna-
sense.
Well, the less sophisticated ones that may not be looking that far in the
Right.
future, it's hard to plan for, but when you have more sophisticated that can plan for themselves and just wanna try to drive the
Well,
price down.
and I'll say this: we get feedback from WUGs that, well, we get all our water from
Yeah.
GBRA.
Right.
We're going to get more water from GBRA in the
They're
future.
They're gonna take care of it.
Well, and
That's it.
all of us.
That's all I know.
All of us plan on continuing our relationship with GBRA as far as the water we've already acquired. So,
But Brian does end up
Yeah.
assigning some WUGs random water when they don't respond. And so,
yeah, but those are awful small quantities
Yeah.
typically.
okay.
I mean,
Yeah.
in the wholesale water
Yeah.
provider world, you could never mount a project in any of those quantities.
Did we use?
Well, I'm just saying, some of the ones
Yeah.
that might be alternative
Alternatives
projects might have
for-
some
for
water
projects.
assigned,
Oh, man.
but not all of them.
Thank you.
Because we have some very large water projects in our plan that not all the water
Moved over to alternative.
Would they show up as
Yeah.
amendments?
So is that?
For the mag
If they were,
limited.
if they
Yeah.
But
were
is that a-
relegated to an
So,
alternative
so
project?
explain again how we did it.
That might
Somebody
be
said they
an
wanted
issue.
20,000 acre feet. And it didn't meet the mag because of other projects.
Yeah, the max said there's only 5,000. Yeah.
Okay, so they would have 5 as a recommended and the other 15 as an alternative?
No, that was the other. No, it'd be 5 as an alternative, as the recommended, and the full 20 is the alternative. Because what we would do is we'd do a swap in that case. If something happened and the mag changed, we would do the
But don't they have
swap
to have a true
substitution.
alternative also? You can't say I need 20 and have 5 recommended and this available only if something changes. Don't you have to have an actual alternative to the 20 you need?
No, everything doesn't have an alternative strategy. Really, you have alternative strategies where you have multiple feasible ideas. It may be,
We can have 0 alternatives if we want.
that's right. If you,
We could take
Although
a.
utilities would tend to consider that prudent.
yeah, I mean, it really, alternatives are not.
Yeah.
There are rules that say how you have to evaluate your alternatives and where you have to show them in your plan, but every recommended doesn't have an alternative behind it.
Well, I mean, but in that, I was thinking in the concept, he said, if you need 20,
Right.
and you got 5 recommended.
They would have another source for the other 15.
Yeah, there'd be
That's
another.
what I said, there had to be
Recommended.
another
Right.
recommended.
And so what could happen is if for something changed with the mag and they wanted to bring that full 20 in, they could take out the 5 and that other 15.
Then that would come in there.
Yes.
But there does have to be a separate.
Yeah, if they have 20,000 in need and that mag project can only supply 5, they still need something, other 15 somewhere. But then they can have the mag unlimited one
Yeah.
back for 20 over here as an
In case
alternative.
something changes, right.
Just since we got started on this management supply thing and why people have them, I put this list back up there. I don't know if you remember this from last time, but this was the various reasons I've heard folks for saying I need more water than exactly what's needed. And so just
We're all good.
just keep it in mind that
All true.
I'm not saying that justifies having 3 times the amount of water or 1.3 times the amount of water, whatever. It's just these are reasons why folks over plan.
Yeah, that's great. Let's hold that for another
Okay.
day.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
Spidey
Absolutely.
sense is going off that bed. Well, I did want to bring up one other idea. So we spent a little bit of time trying to identify, and I think you're going to supply us with something in terms of the.
I already
you
wrote it
have.
down and
Okay.
Cole already typed it up, so.
Great. So the bare bone, low bar, technical standards for water management strategy in order for the review and analysis and evaluation by region. You've identified that. And then we can look to the code. It provides some guidance in terms of what, and not guidance, it specifies what evaluations have to be made. So the underlying information for that evaluation either has to be supplied or developed by you. Right, okay. Those are sort of, in my mind, technical standards. But then I've heard Tom talk about something other than a technical standard, perhaps a planning standard or management standard whereby there's cooperation, coordination with the involved parties.
If, for projects, or I should say for strategies extended that require different entities to pool their projects.
Right, okay. And so, while all of the requirements in code could be achieved without that element, you're pointing out that, at least from a good planning perspective, maybe that's my word, maybe not yours, but it'd be appropriate for that to be something like that, the agreement for the consideration, evaluation, and strategy to come from all involved parties. I recall from our meeting, during the regional meeting, Greg, you brought up an issue with that when some of those parties aren't discrete, distinct individuals, but groundwater owners, I guess, is, the projects that involve groundwater sources that involve the purchase of some groundwater rights or permits or however it was going to work. But there wasn't an entity to stand up and say, yes, we agree with this sort of strategy. It could be it didn't have to be a multi-partner strategy. Does that ring a bell, or maybe I'm putting words in your mouth?
I think we were
Other
talking
deals, I
about.
think I'm trying to prevent some group knocking out a regional strategy. Because I went back and I looked at the interim report from House Natural Resources, and it specifically talks about obstacles to water markets, and it talks about that strategies being knocked out. It's not conducive to regional planning when each individual WUG does its own thing. And it specifies it in here twice. It says that that's a problem in regional planning for developing water markets. And so one of my deals is, I know you want to be part of it and whatever, but I mean, it's just a plan. If you don't want the water, you don't have to take the water. I mean, what's the deal? It's just a plan in there, and it says here's the extra water if you want it. It's showing an economy of scale, and that's what we need. Each individual project you know, maybe the taxpayers could have a better deal if we had an economy of the scale project instead of, I got my project, and then we're putting pipelines through every different deal instead of one pipeline, and then the, you know, environmentally friendly type deals. Everything we do seems to be individual. I'm doing my own thing. I don't even want to see what anybody else is doing.
Well,
you know,
I don't think that's been the history of our projects though, Greg. I mean, you know, and I'll be frank about the history on some of that. We invited GBRA into our projects and to join the HCPUA like 10 years ago. And at that time, you know, they decided that was not in their interest.
Well, I mean, and that's y'all's, and I
Right.
wouldn't get involved in that. But this is a regional conceptual plan.
Right,
I don't
but-
understand the
but
problem
can
with a
you-
regional conceptual plan. If you don't have to do it, but what's the problem with doing it to
if-
show that economy of scale, you get more water and it's cheaper possibly?
You know,
If it's not, then you could eliminate it and say, well, that's not good for us because it's more expensive. I don't want to do it.
Well, it's not just, you know, I think the real issues surrounding that are, you know, come in on a couple levels. One is that it relied upon, in terms of what it requires to make that project work, it requires the supplies that have already been developed under other projects by other entities to be turned over to them. And that was basically an assumption without ever, you know, they said, yes, they'll put it in the plan. If you want to do it, fine. If you don't want to do it, fine. But the point is, it basically says, you know, we're planning to use the supply that you have you know, planned for and invested in. And from the standpoint of, well, we'll supply you the water as a wholesaler, and I'll use wholesaler as an example, whether it's GBRA or not. You know, the point is that from a financial standpoint, you've got customers of the retail utility that are being basically told, look, this project can serve you, and we'll do it, and we'll have the cost associated with not just a resale supplier potentially, but a wholesale supplier. And in contrast to a project that you've already developed and had in place. I mean, this is a little bit like planning to go somewhere by, well, I'm gonna drive my neighbor's car. Well, that may well work, it may be a good idea, it may be the best thing to do. All I'm saying is we should require at least that you ask the neighbor, you know, hey, if my car breaks down, can I drive your car? That's all I'm saying with this, is that we don't surprise each other with plans like that, you know, without just asking, you know, and when we did talk, everybody agreed, we put it in as an alternate, that resolved it. It was just the way it was approached.
Well, that's fine, as long as it doesn't prevent those type of strategies from happening, because once again, that has a component of ASR in it that would help my district, and so I see things that y'all don't see also.
Right. And I recognize you have a different concern there, and I respect that.
That's exactly right, so when I look at it, I look at it from a completely different perspective, so.
And I respect that. I mean, I do understand it. All I'm saying basically, and that's all I said when that came up, you know, when we had this discussion a couple of years ago, was, look, you need to involve us up front and ask us, or at least talk to us about this first. After we talk about it, we all agreed we put it as an alternate. You know, I mean, it may be that those projects merge at some point in the future. We've always, and even currently, I mean, we're in discussions about doing joint facilities. You know, that's in all of our interests. So we're not looking to do competing projects. We just want to, if somebody wants to utilize, you know, a portion of our project or all of our project, that we, you know,
Do it together.
be at the table on
But is that the conversation that you're talking about, that Greg was involved in, about the purchase of rights being, I don't think that was
I don't
it.
think that
There
was
was
part of it.
another,
What let me try to be clear in my comments. My recollection, Greg, was you brought up the issue about, as we were discussing that strategies ought to include expressions of agreement by the involved entities. My recollection is you pointed out, well, some projects involve the purchasing of permits or groundwater rights, I'm not certain how you phrased it.
From
But those aren't, there's not a single individual, nor are they identified as to which permits or groundwater rights would be
Right, that was
purchased.
the
So
sheriff's
there would be no one to express agreement.
Their alternative was, if we don't get the
Simple,
permits,
yeah.
then we're gonna buy out the permits, but same thing, well, you don't have any contract to say who you're gonna buy them out from, so.
In that, just a quick question, in that case, was it
Change the use.
Right.
in that case, was that a recommended strategy or?
It's recommended. And
Okay.
it was Cibolo Valley, and they were actively negotiating with landowners and purchasing, but
Okay.
they didn't release that list of who they were talking to.
Oh,
I mean,
sure.
I think that's one of those things where in planning, there are certain things, there's some things you just can't have certainty about. I
Yeah.
mean, there are, surface water strategies in there that haven't even applied for permits.
Well,
and-
look at all the
Siting
Edwards-
of the off-channel.
Look at all the Edwards strategies,
Yeah.
And the
the
land that
line
goes along
upon
with it.
leased groundwater,
And the
I
land that goes
mean,
along
we
with it.
don't have any standard requiring everybody to prove up their Edwards leases.
There are reservoir strategies across the state that haven't even started talking to the TCEQ, much less the Corps of Engineers.
Or the local landowners that own the land.
Well, I guess
There
the
you go.
only deal would be on that one would be, you can't get the landowner to know ahead of time.
Right.
They have a cost, and eventually that cost they will sell it, but the only deal is, if you're buying out ag, can you transfer that permit from ag to public supply? So I guess you would need to go to that groundwater district and find out if that's, or what,
Well,
if
but
you
are-
can't, then you would have to go through the permitting process again. Well, if you can't get a permit originally, then.
Okay, so if we're going to talk about this idea of expressions of agreement with a strategy, are you suggesting that we're not going to get that from individual landowners? They may not be identified. Are you suggesting that it's still a good idea to have this expression of agreement by the involved entities, and where there's not a discrete entity and it's groundwater related, the Groundwater Conservation District express that agreement?
Or just tell them what the rules are. You got a grandfathered irrigation well, can somebody take that over and convert it to public supply? Well, is that allowed? If it is, then that's fine, then that's a viable strategy, and it's worth doing.
Well, the
So it's-
strategy should have something to do with how much firm availability there
Well,
is,
there-
right?
You've got,
Well, they're talking about
limited by
the-
the mag there, but he's talking about use, the purpose of use of the water.
Mag's still there.
So if you're saying, we're gonna acquire 10,000 acre feet worth of permits that are ag permits, is the district going to let the entity convert that to municipal or public use permits? And I mean, that's not something that the board requires you to look at. The board requires you to look at the mag.
Right.
That's a layer that y'all can consider.
But you're going a step further, and you're talking about grandfathered. Because
Well,
these
either
are-
way, I don't know how they are. Each district has
Yeah.
something different. And
Different
I would
rules.
assume that
Yeah.
if they were willing to give up their ag, but they still had the water rights, they'd have the
Well,
right to do
if-
that. But
if-
there are some districts
yeah.
that have this thing that you can't just convert it from this.
So-
You have to go back through the
Yeah.
permitting process or something like
Since
that.
Con's not here today, I'll channel my best Con, but I think that his concern about approaching something like this from the regional planning group perspective is at some point, we cross the line from planning into actually starting to look at regulatory decisions
Yeah.
that are by law given to the groundwater districts to decide.
We have
I think that would be his concern.
we've adopted a principle that speaks specifically to that
Right.
already.
In other words, you're right, but
The-
just, I mean, but.
guiding principle
Is the regional
on-
planning group the right people to start interpreting whether that?
Well, all I'm saying is you can't have it as a recommended strategy if it wouldn't be allowed by the.
Might have to be
groundwater.
alternate.
Well, I don't know if it could be alternate. If it's not allowed, then how could you
We can
even
find
say?
anything alternate.
Yeah, how could you even say you would
It could be
allowed
with
to do
the
it?
revision of rules or statutes.
law.
I mean, yeah, there's a lot of ways that it could. Well, I'm kind of, actually, let me offer this. So how, I would agree that it would be good for the relationship of entities to coordinate ahead of time before proposing a strategy. But if the idea is those involved parties have to express, and I'm not saying regulatory bodies, but those involved parties, but I am thinking of groundwater permit holders and groundwater owners. If we're going to say, well, all involved parties have to express their support for a strategy, an agreement that that strategy ought to be, I think that presents some real problems to achieve that uniformly across all strategies. And so is it worth trying to embed that into some minimum standard, a hard criteria?
Well, I think there's a difference between the two.
I think you can make a distinction by talking about entities that benefit from a strategy or entities that are served by a
Utilizing
strategy.
utilizing their resources. But
Utilizing
That's
their
a groundwater.
the thing is, and I guess, well, with the groundwater thing, though, the point is, if there's a groundwater market, I mean, Greg makes the exact, right point, and that is, at some point, a lot of folks having ag permits would be willing to sell them in terms of some value. There's probably a number out there at which, folks would say, I can't make that much farming, I'd be better off selling this, selling the water.
Well, and
Yeah, but if I were to put, just real quick.
I guess all I'm saying,
if
if there's a market, I mean.
But doesn't that apply to
it's
everything,
not-
though,
It's
Tom?
not, well, sort of.
Your sources are for sale, I suspect, at the right
Well,
price.
possibly, I suppose.
Yeah.
Well,
The city's gonna
and-
move away.
If they would be serving, no, if they would service back, I guess is the point. But I mean, those kinds of agreements could be reached, but the point is, if they're relying on a resource to make the project work, they can't achieve that without it, so.
There's a policy in Chapter 8 the planning group adopted a while ago, and I think it started out with Edwards transfers, but it
Yeah.
applies to everything, but it talks about willing buyers, willing sellers,
Yeah.
and not interfering with that
And
process.
that's recognizing that there's a market.
There's a market.
Okay. I think we've reached a good stopping point. Again,
We
appreciate.
could go on all
Jim's
night.
grateful to stop at this point.
I'm sorry.
Said you're grateful to
Oh,
stop.
yeah. Well, I think we have a lot that we can go through. Cole, you're going to make this audio available for those that like to do that. I'll go back and review just because I can't keep up. If it's acceptable with the group, I'll review that. Of course, y'all can review it. Give me, if you don't mind, give me an opportunity to suggest sort of next steps for moving the ball forward, which may involve condensing a lot of these comments into some sort of written form and send those out before we meet again for review. Does that sound acceptable? Okay.
And then our next meeting is to describe concepts we're supposed to come.
Well, yeah, I think two things. I'd like to touch on the concept of management supply, but I'd like to do that in the context of we've already articulated some ideas about minimum what standards would be, and maybe the difference between let's call them rigid standards versus the phrase was philosophy or good best practice sort of ideas.
Something that might help us on that topic is an actual tally of where we stand currently and recommended strategies versus the identified needs and.
Oh,
how
for
that-
the management supply?
Yeah.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
I mean, actually getting the numbers, because I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong.
I had that. Yeah.
At least a ratio with the last
It-
meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fairly high level, but it was, give me a second here.
And was that by recommended and alternative?
Just recommended.
It's just recommended.
It was, the needs total, this is by 2070, 483,000, and the recommended strategies total 787. That's round number. It's probably down to,
Yeah,
but basically a 0.6 management supply,
right.
60% more.
Well, I have a lot of questions about that, but I really would like to hold to the next meeting. We'll get mine.
Yeah, but and I can pull the alternative amounts too, if that's what you want to see.
Yeah, just some metrics around that so we can see what the numbers look like, because at some point, we'll have to talk about numbers, I would think.
To the extent I think we may if we recommend anything at all, I think we would. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Okay, so in terms of our next meeting, well, you have the
God,
calendar.
May is next.
Yeah.
Don't do the 18th and 19th.
This year is going.
Well, what are you folks thinking about the first week of May? Yeah, the calendar.
Yeah, first week of May is Regional meeting.
Regional, forget that, yeah.
Well, is it gonna be a long one? Oh, I guess we don't know yet.
They're all on.
Are there
Two quick
short
coming
ones?
several years ago, they're all.
Mid-May, the week of 15th through 19th.
That's another month of the ledge meeting, anything could happen between now and
Oh,
then.
God, no kidding.
Yeah, the week of the 15th through 19th is better than the previous week for me.
The rest of that week's free for me.
And I could do it if it's the 18th and 19th, I'm out of town, so. And actually, I guess part of the 17th.
Got a board meeting the 17th.
How about
16th?
Monday, the 15th?
15th? I'm
I
good.
could do that.
Does that
Yeah.
work for everyone? Afternoon, morning?
Well, if we keep the same time,
1:30?
same bat stations on, that'd be my
Okay.
preference. Okay, so May 15th. At 1:30. And you'll check in to see if we can get this room or not?
Yeah, I'm looking at that right now.
Tim, thank you for today.
Yeah.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm hopeful we'll arrive at our destination.
Well, we're
Whatever the-
certainly covering every possible
Yeah.
thing that could be discussed.
All right. Well, guys, with that,
Is that a crack at my dating?
No, but I am gonna.
I'm glad that's recorded,
I'm
though.
gonna really hold your.
Yeah.
I'm gonna think of a really good one to
Hey,
come back with.
metaphors are okay.
The Regional match game.
Yeah.
It's okay, I won't hold it.
oh no.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank
See
you.
later.
Would you mind keeping that scanner?
Yeah. Let's get this real quick.
All right. Well, guys, thank you.
Y'all aren't looking at any of those wastewater discharge bills over that. Is all your discharge out
Yeah,
of the
we're,
region?
oh
They're
yeah,
all-
right, so we're not, I mean, none of those affect us.
Okay.
I mean, in terms of our own operation.
Right.
You know what I mean? I'm not saying we're happy to see.
Right, no.
You know,
I didn't think any of y'all's.
discharges, I mean, ultimately though, in the real world, we view all that from a water quality standpoint. You know what I mean?
It's,
We can
kind of a
discharge
different
anything.
fact. Well, sometimes, other staff will go with me.
Technically, you know what I'm saying, we can't be stupid about this.
Well,
stuff.
Tony,
Say, oh, we
Tony
can't
usually
do
does
this.
a release of data for
It's like, people living there would refer, you know, nothing, septic systems, septic systems.
Mind if we, Brian and I stay here just for a minute?
That's fine.
Yeah,
Or
that's
we
fine.
prefer to do central sewer.
I'm just trying to I'm trying to schedule this meeting.
A third of a percent leaking in the reservoir.
Okay.
It's still better.
The rest of it's all gonna be, you know, purified, whatever standards.
Extra hour and driving an extra hour.
Nothing up to me.
Yeah.
Just thought I'd introduce myself.
I
I
prefer to just.
never had that opportunity yet.
Thanks for sharing.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Someone's got to do
It's-
it.
I hate to bring up the GBRA examples, but I mean, that's kind of what.
That's what
kind of what spurred some of that.
Drove this, sure.
And, you know, I mean, I get Greg's concern, I mean, I understand where he's coming from. And, you know, I think I'm not sure he really gets the problems that having some kind of prescriptive plan. I mean, this is like, it's okay to plan a barbecue,
Well, I
but
grew
you
up
can't plan
in
your
Austin.
neighbor's steak.
So driving 5 hours somewhere is
That
not,
vitamin,
you know, it's.
Well, I
that's
think we
all,
may be
it's a
able to-
common sense kind of thing, that's all I'm trying to get through here is like.
Any water.
I mean, really, that all comes back to, like, look, the bottom line is you find something else, don't take anything from here. and I don't know how to break this down, but the whole ledge isn't looking at that down here right now. It's all about private property rights, right?
Right.
You know, you're a regulator, but you can't stand between.
You think about it,
Property
Jesus.
owner,
I will,
visibility
you
to
know,
market,
every
it's
time I
about
go
buying
leave my
and
house to get to the airport,
anything stands up.
They mow them down.
Well, I think we can work